Jamie.
Hi, Karen. How are you doing?
All right, thank you. All right, thanks ever so much for agreeing to talk to us today. I thought it might be quite nice just to talk to the artist about why you've done what you've done. So we're just going to have a chat about your current exhibition, Fulfilment Centre, that's on at Cupola Gallery, also known as Cupola Contemporary Art in Hillsborough in Sheffield until the 4th of June. Now, first question is, why did you call it Fulfilment Centre?
Well, I didn't know. I feared you may ask me that. I'm having a branding crisis, maybe. There's work in the show from what I've realised is three different threads of inquiry.
Okay.
So if you go on my website, they're all sort of categorised under their three separate titles.
Okay.
But they were all made at the same period, the sort of 2 years, really since we locked down, I guess. So it's not really a lockdown show, but it just happens to be work made in those 2 years.
Yes.
So,
yeah.
You know, so the name really is. I was just first of all, it's just a really great name. It's what Amazon call their warehouses.
Yeah.
Fulfillment.
And potentially during the pandemic, you know, they did all right out of that, didn't they?
Yeah, they were fulfilled quite immeasurably, really, weren't they?
Yeah.
But I think it's a really lovely aspirational thing. I quite like. I suppose I feel like the work quite often has a slightly sinister edge to it, but it isn't really. That's just me being me, I guess. But I like things that have a sort of air of hope about them, and I think fulfillment that's obviously a very aspirational thing. You know,
it is,
word,
and then linked to the cynicism of Amazon's kind of title, really. Yeah.
So I get, and really, I know I'm not really making the connection very well, but the idea that there's this place where all things are gathered.
Yeah.
You know, so all the work I'd made in the last 2 years was gathered in this fulfillment centre, really.
So in the exhibition, we have got paintings. We've got quite a complex wooden sculpture. Then we have 3 sculptures that seem to be kind of encased or wrapped in plastic.
Yeah.
And then you have the robot dog. Sort of. Do you want to say a little bit about kind of those 3 bodies of work? You know, where you were coming from in terms of making them.
Right. Okay. I suppose so. Behind everything was this idea that I wanted to look at how figures interact. So I'd made an exhibition previously, which has been at Cupola, called The Way of All Flesh, which was very much studies of individual figures, individual people, if you like, or characters. And I wanted to look at how they can interact, because they seem to do that naturally in the exhibition anyway. So with that brief, if you like, that line of inquiry, I sort of had to think about, I suppose, where I see that, or where I've seen that and it's interesting and that sort of thing. And because it's sculpture, you know, it kind of often it has to be a physical or an implied physical thing. So that really, it's called You Are Now Entering Meritocracy, Please Tread Carefully. So it started as a painting, which became a sculpture, and it's a figure being carried by lots of other figures. And similarly, the plastic stuff really, I guess I realized all of it was about barriers between people, or, you know, how we can elect to put space between us, so we can choose not to see things that are troubling, or we can choose not to feel something about something that somebody said to us even.
So in some ways it's about human agency and the fact that we have agency, and it's how we choose to use it. Yeah,
it's sometimes I think it's about all those things to do with just making choices in order to just get by. Because if you were to take on board everything that's going on around you all the time, you wouldn't be able to step out the door. So I suppose more than anything, rather than being necessarily about a pandemic, the work was being made, it sort of grew up in a time when people were behaving in response to a pandemic. And there were other things going on. You know, the political scene in America was reaching a real kind of violent, you know, sort of crux, like an apex of complete and utter chaos, really, with the, you know, the
January the 6th,
the riots and things over there and all that kind of thing. There were lots of things going on that just seemed to make me think about the very, you know, the ways we interact and the ways we choose to kind of ignore or to take part. So the plastic covers, that's the thing. Plastic just, it's a covering, it's hiding or it's protecting. It's a lovely thing because it's new and it's kind of colourful and nice and joyous. But it's also a pollutant. We know now it's a pollutant. I think even 20 years ago, we probably wouldn't have made that connection quite so quickly now, as we do now, you know. So I think
because
it's quite,
plastic has been hugely useful to us, hasn't it? I mean,
and it still is. I don't really know how we're going to break that, really.
Yes, and that's quite interesting, because the plastic ones for me, I find really quite disturbing, because I see the sculptures as looking like covered figures, and plastic, as we know, if you put plastic over a face, it's going to kill you. You know, it's suffocating. But then the colors that you've used are quite luscious, quite sumptuous colors. But the smaller figure for me almost has a religious feel.
Yeah,
that's how I respond to it. Is that deliberate, or is that my problems?
No, I mean, so originally I'd looked at using that stuff that they wrap cars with, you know, that vinyl wrap where you heat it up and it kind of
right, yeah.
Because I just had all these wonderful ideas of having like the texture of split wood, but then it's covered in this amazing graphic kind of shiny plastic thing like a sports car.
Right.
But I couldn't, that stuff didn't work. It was too thin and it was too brittle and all those sorts of things. And it doesn't want to stick to wood, you know, so there were lots of reasons why that wasn't going to work. So I started using this thicker sheet plastic that you have to heat and bend. It's the stuff they use for vac forming.
Right, okay.
But because of that, it doesn't stretch and pull the wrinkles out. So inevitably, everything's become a draped figure. It looks like cloth.
Yes.
So you're going to have those sort of classical references, which is no bad thing necessarily. I think it can help you to think about how, you know, what the meaning might have been behind drapery in the old brown paintings we see, you know. I mean, it's covering a face. I mean, there's quite a tradition of making marble heads.
There is.
There was quite a tradition of making marble heads in a very thin veil, you know, and I don't think that was ever supposed to be disturbing to look at.
No, I think it was supposed to be sensuous, wasn't it? I think it was supposed to be quite kind of indicative or showy in terms of skill, but also that idea of kind of a precious veil and a spiritual veil. I think it was symbolic as well as anything. And I suppose what you're doing is also symbolic, you know, but you leave it open to interpretation from the people that view those pieces. And I think your titles encourage interpretation, because when I see the you're now entering Meritocracy sculpture, I see it in one way, but the first time I saw it, I immediately thought of Icarus, you know, the falling figure held up by something that doesn't look as though it should hold you up, because it has kind of a fragile feel to it. And I like that play, and I hadn't really recognized the fact that you say it's kind of other figures that are holding that figure up. I hadn't really seen that.
Yeah, I mean, I don't suppose it's not meant to be obvious. I think they are other figures. I think there's enough. There's some fingers here. There's some couple of holes in a piece of wood next to each other that make you think they're probably eyes and that sort of thing.
That's right.
And if you want to then pick out the figures, you can.
Yeah.
But I think there's lots of things going on, but I do like the sort of cognitive dissonance thing quite a lot. So going back to the plastic, the idea that it can be a very beautiful, nice new thing, but it can also be this pollutant. I really like, you know, the thing I'm really enjoying with figures working together is you're not sure if they're helping each other or they're hindering each other, you know, whether it's a positive relationship or not, you know. And I think it's up to you, the viewer, to decide that, really.
The connections, obviously, as you said, is a theme. So tell us about the robot dog, Boston Dynamics.
Right. So I feel like I have to kind of tell the story of how this thing popped into my head, but they sort of don't. They sort of gestate and things, and I'm not really sure where I remember.
Okay.
So
good.
I've been looking at ways of I've been looking at ways of joining wood together. Actually, that is how the plastic thing came about. So the plastic thing, I found a picture of 2 pieces of wood stuck inside a pop bottle that had been heated up and shrunk, and the plastic had gripped the 2 pieces of wood. So it's really, really kind of accessible way to make wood joints in a place where you might not have tools, but you might have lots of plastic bottles, you know.
Well, yes.
But it was that's where that thing popped into my head. Anyway, and the similar thing, there was a wooden ball and socket joint, which I really liked, and I just thought I made one, and I was kind of making the figures for the Meritocracy sculpture, which are kind of robotic like, and I got thinking about Spot, which is a dog made by a company called Boston Dynamics. But I didn't really think about Spot. I thought about the things I'd seen maybe 15, 20 years ago on YouTube, which were the very early prototypes, which were much bigger and kind of more like a horse, and they ran with a diesel engines, and they were kind of designed for military use. And then Spot is this lovely little yellow dog, which you can buy and have run around your house and run around your warehouse or whatever. It's a sort of commercial spin-off of that. But the testing, the videos on YouTube that I referred to, they're testing videos where they basically kick this dog and push it over and see what they can do to stop it from being what it's designed to do, and see how good it is at recovering. And again, I just thought there's a lovely, this cognitive dissonance thing. So people look at the dog and they go, oh, it's a bit creepy, that. But to think it's a bit creepy, you've got to kind of project consciousness onto it or something.
You've got to anthropomorphize it.
But then to be the man, yeah, absolutely, yeah. And then to be the man who works in Boston Dynamics, who, you know, they say on Friday, "Oh, come in Monday, you'll be kicking the dog." You've got to somehow either suspend the anthropomorphization bit that you're doing in your head, or you have to just be okay with it. And you know, I think there's a sort of interesting moral thing there about it's easy to go, "Oh, it's just a robot," on Monday, but on Friday it was Spot because you gave it a name, Spot. You know.
But I
don't think there was much I needed to.
Oh, sorry. I was going to say, well, I think there's several things going on there, because I definitely got the idea of anthropomorphizing animals, because I have a tendency to talk to dogs like small children. You know, I get overexcited, and but there's the idea of kicking the dog. There's how you feel kicking the dog. There's how you might feel if somebody watches you kick the dog.
Yeah.
Well, and also the idea of somebody taking photos of you kicking the dog. There's kind of 3 elements, and I think, you know, the voyeuristic element is in there as well. And what I'm fascinated by is the fact that we have a tendency to go, oh, violence is wrong, but actually we're quite drawn to it, aren't we? It's like the most popular video games are the shoot 'em ups, the popular, you know, films, or, you know, superheroes and action things. So we kind of enjoy it. So I think there's you know, all of that is linked into that particular piece, certainly for me. And when I've talked to people about it, they've kind of gone, yeah, that makes a lot of sense. You know,
I don't know if it's a sort of a catharsis, or if we're just acknowledging that there is the potential for violence in all of us, or I'm not sure, you know. it's really interesting because that was actually a collaboration, that work, with a chap called David Fulford. So, and it was really his idea to take it that way. I just made a dog and kind of wanted to, I was probably going to get my iPhone out and video it or something, you know. And David, who photographs my work a lot, he was very good at sort of capturing shapes in the photographs that I draw, you know, the poses and things, and quite similar to some of the drawings I make. It's photographed in a way that my sculptures are photographed. So he's interwoven those things really well. But there was that thing of, I had to kind of really go for it with this mate of mine watching. And I am aware it's now on a wall in the gallery, and it's me doing that.
Yeah,
you know, and do people
beast?
do people think like that's just getting something out of me, you know? Because I don't think I'm a, you know I'm not, but you know what I mean? I think there's this, without realizing, it's quite exposing. I don't really ever often feel that as an artist, but because it is me doing a violent thing.
Yeah.
Sometimes I stop and think about it and go, oh yeah, that's one too.
But also the way it's lit, again, it's got that almost classical feel. You've got a bit of a Caravaggio light thing going on.
Yeah, and that's photography, you know, it's made it really beautiful. And so there's a lot, I mean, I try and, like, I'm a visual artist, you know, so often it's the image that comes first, and then all this guff now that I'm spouting just happens while I'm making it. I think, well, why did you choose that image? And the image becomes changed while you're making it because you're thinking about it. You know, it's not a conceptual artist who comes up with an idea that has all this weightiness behind it and then tries to make the image that fits that. It is very much about beautiful images.
Yes.
And not necessarily conventionally so. As he says, they're often disturbing or whatever, but it's got to be it's got to look good.
Well, yes, but the thing is, if you don't look good, it doesn't engage. I mean, and look good is not necessarily pleasing, but it has to be strong. It has to have a feel to it, and I think all your work definitely does that, because, you know, the appeal of the carving, the appeal of the photograph, the appeal of the materials, because, you know, wood is very appealing, and then, you know, and then we come to the paintings. Again, the actual surface, the glazes, the color choices are all have that strength and actually an appeal on the actual surface level, whether it's how you've used the paint or how you've chosen the color dynamic, again, is appealing. But it also asks a question as well, because you've not made it particularly simple. It's a figure, but it's been simplified. Is it a figure in action? The one certainly behind me is two figures, and that could be something quite violent. It could be dance. It could be, and you've given people room to interpret it. Did you have an aim in terms of communicating a particular thing with those drawings?
No. Yes and no. So visually, for me, I'm trying to kind of, well, I think I'm there now in terms of the drawing I'd been doing previously had been very, very labor intensive.
Yeah.
Very kind of tightly formed, like sculptural drawings.
Yeah.
And they became, just sort of near the end of the period of making lots of drawings a couple of years ago, they became a bit looser. I started throwing ink around and stuff.
Yeah.
And it felt more appropriate, really, just in terms of this.
Is it a certain freedom? Because, like, is it a certain freedom? Because there's a, you know, when you were kicking the dog, for example, you know, it's quite a gestural movement, and obviously, you know, when you throw paint around, it's the same. It's a physical movement, which is more dynamic, because drawing, certainly highly detailed drawing, is very controlled, and this is a freeing of the way that you're drawing or making these images.
Yes and no. It's funny, really, because I thought it would be. I mean, my imagined sort of end product, if you like, was I wanted to be able to kind of do things within 2 or 3 brushstrokes at the most. Something about just having a very instant statement, reaction, whatever. But that has to be rehearsed, and there has to be a structure.
No, definitely.
You have to know where you're going to put those brush strokes. And I think it's the idea of the tortured genius who just picks up a brush and goes, and that's that. It's just nonsense. So there are look, hang on, here, I've got these. I don't know what these are pre-drawings.
Yeah.
So they in some ways, there's a freedom in those. I can throw charcoal around.
Yeah.
And it's not designed to be shown. I think there's a really interesting kind of, you call them paintings, I still think of them as drawings, but
I use both terms actually. Yeah.
Right,
yeah.
Right. They're drawing with paint. It's kind of a bit borderline, really, isn't it?
Yeah,
but, there's those types of drawings that are never really meant to be seen, and there's those types of drawings that are to be presented, which is the things in your gallery. But obviously, I'm mindful that they're going to be seen.
Yes.
And purchased and hung in homes and that kind of thing. So it's a different sort of set of criteria you're working with. But to answer your question, it was nowhere near as free and expressive as I thought it would be. They're actually quite planned and controlled, but they're not. It's quite a sort of calm, Zen-like way of doing it, whereas the drawing very, very tight form for hours on end, for days on end, was quite sort of, it was like a slog, and it was quite like whipping yourself with birch branches or something.
Back to the religious, yeah.
And I suppose I don't really feel, I feel like I can be a bit easier on myself these days, and I want something that still says all the things that my work has said in the past, but much more directly. And I think one of the things I realised was the number of people who looked at those drawings and said, "Oh, that's really that must have taken you hours," or "Oh, that's so much skill in there," and kind of didn't really connect with it on a human level,
Yeah.
It's all technical.
Yeah.
Quite a dramatic, impressive picture.
Yeah, that makes sense of the colours and the form in the way, because when you saw it, when I'm talking about the gestural mark making, and I'm aware that it's a skill anyway, because I once saw a video of Matisse drawing his son or nephew or something, and he made it look so simple, and I knew that's not simple at all. That's like 40 years of practice, to get
and also they will have filmed that probably a dozen times and just shown the best one.
Yeah, absolutely, because it was Picasso that said genius is 99% perspiration and 1% inspiration. That very often, to do something very simple, you've done it 80 times and one turns out right. It's like photographers, you take 200 shots to get the one, and that's what people don't really get, because when I was looking at these, I could see that with the figures and the way the paint is bled, you had to know where that was going, or else it wouldn't work. I can see that.
I mean, I'm glad, it's good to hear, because I'm still it's the first time I've shown them.
Yeah.
And I'm still quite anxious about it. It's something I want to do, and I'm quite anxious that people won't really, like they're too simple or something. There's a bit of me somewhere that has to make things complicated for them to be good.
Yeah, we all do. It's like, if you start a painting, you finish it too quickly, there's something that's gone wrong. There needs to be more pain involved in the finished piece. But the point is that pain exists all the time, and if one comes together quickly, we should be grateful, rather than a bit kind of, I'm not sure this is right. But you said again about the one behind me, you filled in all the frayed edges with extra ink because it wasn't quite how you wanted it to be. And but it isn't obvious until you say that. And I think that's really important, because you still have the feeling that you've got, you know, in that work. There is a freshness and there is a liveliness to it, by allowing that paint to do what it wants to do, but you still have kept an element of control. And with all the materials, really, you know, you are manipulating it, but you've still got to allow the material to do what it wants to do, in order for it to be a successful use of that material. And I like the interplay, you know. For me, you know, the wood and the plastic, if it had been plastic with metal, it would have a different feel. If your sculpture in the window was made out of metal and not of wood, it would have a different feel. And I think those materials, you know, say something about the work that you've produced in the show.
Yeah, it's tricky. I mean, I do know, for me, there's a very personal kind of connection with the material. I mean, it's just perfect to make figures from, for me. But all right, so I've got a little thing here. Look. This is what I'm doing in a minute, Karen.
Yeah.
Right? Little, I don't know if you can tell, it's a pair of figures.
Excellent.
And they're kind of held together with this plastic polyurethane glue, basically. And if you cast that in bronze, it would be a very commercial piece. But it would lose, the woodness is the point, you know, the woodness and the plasticness in this case. The thing about that sort of skill and people admiring it as well, I made a wooden head years and years ago, and I put it in an exhibition, and it was okay. It was a pretty good head, really, the first head, but it was dull as ditch water. And so I brought it back to the studio, and it's just kind of easily accessible film. So it's just, there are 3 photographs of it happening. I just put an axe on its face and hit the axe and chopped its face off. Yeah. And then I since exhibited it with its face kind of laying on the table in front of it. It's this faceless head with a face. And it immediately made it much more interesting. It was much more kind of intriguing piece. So I think sometimes the only way I can get around that kind of fetishizing of skill is to sort of deny it in some way. So one of the things that head, or that wooden head with the grey plastic over it, does is it covers up at least half of the very time consuming and patient and skilled carving. Just covers it up, you can't see it.
No. I've had a number of people ask me what it is.
Right.
What is it? And then they read the title and they're still confused. And I direct them to the other 2 pieces. And then some people kind of work it out, and some people go, still don't know what it is. But again, because you work with figures, when you alter them in a way that makes them not necessarily look like a figure, people have trouble to interact with it. Because if all the work had been completely abstract, you wouldn't have had people saying, what is it? You know? No,
they just accept that it's abstract.
That it was an abstract piece. And well, there's your cognitive dissonance again, isn't it? So
sometimes as well, you just get that thing of people just asking you, is it finished? Is it finished? Well,
it's in a gallery, so probably.
It's on the plinth, you know.
Interesting.
What do you do with that, really? I like that. I mean, I like that piece. It's a bit of an odd one. It doesn't have any like classic, really dynamic kind of structures in it that can just lead you in or anything. It is a funny piece, but I really like it for that. You know, it's not as obvious what to do with it.
No, that's right. But people are drawn to it because they don't know what it is. So you know, it works on that way. Well, look, that's been absolutely brilliant talking to you, and clearly I see things that you know weren't there, or weren't there quite so obviously.
Everybody does.
Yeah, I mean, all your work is about the human condition, and it will be endlessly fascinating, and it will see what happens. And it's interesting how some people see the work as quite dark, and other people don't see that at all. Yeah, thank you very much for showing with us. And yeah, and we'll, it's on until the 4th of June, Monday to Saturday, 10 a.m. to 6 p.m. So Jamie Frost, thank you very much. Okay.
Thank you.